Hello. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. There we go. So thank you all for being here. Day 3, Spring Lobby Weekend. And we have some very exciting panelists today. We're going to continue to learn so much about what we're advocating for tomorrow, why we're advocating for it. Reminder that we want our legislators to support and co-sponsor the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act. And hopefully we will accomplish so much tomorrow in our lobbying when we're asking our legislators to do that. So if you happen to know someone in your group that's not here, or you know someone's missing from the room, please text them and let them know that we've started and that they should get down here as soon as they can. So thank you for that. I will start by introducing our panelists, the people on stage. So this is not in order of how they're sitting here. But first we have Deborah Parker. Deborah Parker is a well-respected mother, leader, and citizen of the Tulalip tribes. She is also of Yaki and Pachi descent on her mother's side. Teresa is the Chief Executive Officer at the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, and originally joining in 2021 as the Director of Policy and Advocacy. She comes with over 25 years of national and international legislative policy and advocacy experience. Deborah's previous roles include the TWN Executive Director of Residential School Healing in British Columbia, Canada, Government Affairs Policy Analyst for the Tulalip Tribes, Senior Policy Advisor at Pipestem Law, and Director of Equity, Diversity, and Indigenous Education in the Marysville School District. So thanks for being here, Deborah. So next to me, we have Teresa Sheldon. Teresa is a citizen of the Tulalip tribes, has been the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, so we've been referring to NABS, since April 2022. Teresa has 16 years of experience in political advocacy, serving in numerous roles with the Democratic National Committee, Emily's List, and Tulalip tribes, while also presiding as the Native American Director for the Biden-Harris Presidential Inaugural Committee. Teresa is an advocate for historical justice, civic engagement, upholding and strengthening tribal sovereignty and the trust responsibility, and protecting sacred places. She graduated from Western Washington University with a BA in Law and Diversity in 2005. So thanks for being here. And on the end there, we have, some of you met him yesterday at a workshop, Larry Wright Jr. Thank you for being here. Larry is an enrolled member of the Ponca tribe of Nebraska and served as tribal chairman for his tribal nation for 11 years. Currently, Mr. Wright is the executive director of the National Congress of American Indians, NCAI, the oldest, largest, and most representative American Indian and Alaska Native organization, serving the broad interests of tribal governments and communities. In this position, Mr. Wright is responsible for managing the day-to-day operations of the organization and creating a strategic pathway to long-term success for NCAI and the NCAI Fund. Mr. Wright is a military veteran who brings with him a diverse background in education, management, and entrepreneurship. So thanks for being here, Larry. All right, so we'll start with some questions. And my first question is to Deborah and Larry. We have hundreds of young adults with us this weekend. You see them here to engage in this collective work. Many are newly immersed, though not all, in the history of Indian boarding schools in the US and the call for federal government accountability. Others are intimately familiar or seasoned advocates. Each boarding school was different, and each child's experience was also different. So could you two start us from the beginning by explaining the history of Indian boarding schools and the federal government's involvement? And I don't know who wants to start.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
We're just debating over here.
Aho ponka moshe lashwa de wanoche ijajekte abli wishti usni ponka abli. Good morning, everybody. My name is Larry Wright Jr. I'm from the Usni Ponca tribe in Nebraska. It's an honor to be here this morning. So when we talk about the history of boarding schools, and first of all, I don't know how I got on this panel with these two powerful women, so I'm gonna do my best. But the federal government and its policies of assimilation and relocation and putting Indian nations on reservations and really trying to break that cycle. When boarding schools were started, it was a simple model of kill the Indian and save the man. And these boarding schools started in Carlisle and proliferated around the country in Canada. But where our children from our people were taken away, forcibly taken away in many cases, and removed far away from their people and their homelands to teach them colonized activities and teaching them how to be white, for lack of a better word, and teaching them skills, more of teaching them trades so that they could go work and for others instead of a true education process. And the girls were taught different things as far as cooking and cleaning and sewing and doing those kind of activities. And the boys were taught other trades and as such. But when we look at the difference in the boarding schools themselves and where they were located and who they were run by, Indian country was essentially divided up amongst those organizations, religious organizations, and we saw that happen across the country. And so when our children were taken away, sometimes the parents would follow just to try and be close, but many times when those children were taken away, it was the last time their family saw them, because many thousands and tens of thousands of our children never came home. And when they got sick or died, and many times they were unceremoniously buried. And that's the work that these ladies are doing with their organization, is finally having some reconciliation with that. And we've seen this time and again, and I know there's a lot more to this, but when we look at across the country and in our different areas, I think all of us we all come from different areas, but those boarding schools are in our backyards. And many times, as this whole process has started, and for many years, I drove by the one that's close to me and not knowing everything that happened. And today, the work that is being done is helping to reconcile that and find our children that didn't come home. And I know I got off topic, but.
Half-datitude, Sitsayatsa, Sitsta, Twelchuf, Tuthlelap, Yaki Pachi. Good morning, dear relatives in this room. It's good to see each and every one of you, especially our young people who fill this room, and all of your beauty, your wisdom, and everything you brought from you as a new one coming into this world and seeing what you're meant to see. And so in our spiritual and cultural way, we believe that you are born here with the gifts of spirituality, of mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional beauty and wholeness. And so in this quest to understand this world, we of course attach ourselves to different ways of life and different beings. And so this morning I woke up and gave gratitude to our Creator and ancestors for this moment in time to spend with you, especially the younger generation. I'm a mother of 3 children. My son Cedar is 27 years old. My daughter Kaya is 25, and I have a 14-year-old who just loves gaming, and I can't get him off that machine right now, but that's a whole nother thing. So I'm sure now that mom's in DC, he's having the time of his life. I come from the Tulalip tribes, and how many of you know where that's located? Okay, a couple. Vance, Black Fox, you know where that's at. And I just want to acknowledge our former NABS board member and staff member. He actually was someone I worked with when I volunteered for NABS many years ago. We created 1,000 care packages to boarding school survivors, 1,000. And it was done with the support of volunteers, of Vance and others who really wanted to give some love during the pandemic to elders who were in remote places, who were, suffering at the loss of those close community ties. So we wanted to send some gifts to them. So at the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition, NABS, our goal is to help bring families together, help in the pursuit of truth about what happened to our family members through the boarding school era, justice, to find justice for those who have never been able to tell their stories. And for some of us, we ask, why have they not told their stories? And there's a multitude of reasons, of course, but for some, they were never allowed to tell their stories. My grandparents were not allowed to speak their language because they were beaten, they were hit, they were removed, and often jailed or put in handcuffs. And these were children from the age of 3 years old on up. Many also were sent away to other institutions. They were not only sent to boarding schools, but if they didn't follow the rules, they were sent to non-Indian homes. They were sent to other locations, near and far. So for us, we're still looking for where our children are, whether they're buried or they were sent to unknown locations. And so that's why we have the Truth and Healing Commission bill. That's why NABS was created by our elders and tribal leaders who had the foresight to say, we need to know the truth. We need justice, and ultimately we need to heal from these wounds. And so I really am in deep, gratitude with Larry and Teresa, who sit beside me, because this has impacted our lives, the lives of our children. And we know that if we don't find this healing and justice, it will continue to impact our grandchildren and their grandchildren and so forth. So as I look around the room and the messages, I see love thy neighbor, no exceptions. That's such a beautiful statement. And I know as our elders teach us, these are words, but I love that the Quakers believe this is something that you have to live by. They're not only words. For us, we have songs and dances. They say they're not only songs and dances, but it's our stomach. Mm-hmm. It's our way of life. This is who we are. And so once again, I just want to thank you for being here. Thank you for bringing your good spirit. And I hope that we continue to work together, because this is so important on behalf of my relatives, behalf of my family, behalf of boarding school survivors who never got to tell their stories. Thank you.
Thank you for that. And you mentioning children, grandchildren, the generations that are still to come does bring me to the question that I want to ask you, Teresa. So when we talk about the intergenerational impact and trauma of Indian boarding schools, what does that mean? expanding more on what that means. What is the lasting harm for the various indigenous communities that live in the United States?
Absolutely. So Hath Dadatut, everyone join me. Hath Dadatut. Good morning. Teresa, Sheldon, Seeds, Tual Chud Duflela. Teagweed Seed for being here this morning with all of you. I think when we talk about intergenerational trauma, it's really easy. So I Googled it, right? I was like, what comes up when you do that? As a director of policy and advocacy, that's what we do. We Google and research, right? And so I found it fascinating because intergenerational trauma, historical trauma, transgenerational trauma, generational trauma is all defined by 3 categories. And it's saying it may begin with a traumatic event affecting an individual, a traumatic event affecting multiple family members, and or a collective trauma affecting a larger community that is by racial, ethnic group combined, right, for Native Americans. And so it goes into even further saying symptoms. What are symptoms of intergenerational trauma? And it goes into low self-esteem, depression, anxiety, insomnia, anger, which I define with, self-destruction, behavioral issues, PTSD, codependency, hypervigilance, difficulty, trusting others, mental health issues, substance use issues, unhealthy attachments, anxiety, right? And I was just like, goodness, telling my story, right? Really, when we talk about intergenerational trauma, I'm going to show you why I'm wearing it. And so in my skirt, I literally have 4 generations. In the orange is my great-grandmother, Teresa, and she went to the Tulalip boarding school. And in the black is my grandma, Nola, who attended the boarding school. And in the purple is my mother. And then in the blue is me, right? 4 generations of that. My mother was sexually abused at the age of 6 years old from boarding school attendee, a boarding school survivor. We call them survivors. Her life was actually formulated around the trauma of childhood abuse. And her life, when she passed away, on her death certificate, it says she died of liver failure. I know that's trauma. She actually died of the trauma of her childhood that she didn't get through, right? I'm a result of the 4 generations of trauma. I literally am wearing it every day, right? As a Native person, I can choose to not wear it visibly, but it's always here with me. Like I cannot talk about it and I can disassociate it and disregard it, but it's going to show up in my work. It's going to show up in my parenting. And it's going to show up in how I present myself to you and to other people. That intergenerational trauma isn't a choice. And that's the harshness of it for Native people, is it's not a choice. We're not able to pick which family we're born into and who started the work and who started breaking down the trauma and who started going to therapy and who started addressing it, right? And so when we talk about intergenerational trauma, it's super easy to blame, judge, and say, oh, that was so long ago. For us, it's today. I think it's March 20th, 2024. And it's today for us. And that's what we carry, right? And that's the work we're doing. And so it's understanding that and understanding the impacts. And we understand that Native Americans were omitted from the United States in our history. We're omitted from the United States in our curriculum. And we're omitted in so much of the truth. Yet the foundation of this country was created from our genocide and from the atrocities of our people. And so when we're here to advocate for legislation and we're here to advocate for truth, that is the healing of intergenerational trauma, right? Because to get healing, you have to say the truth. And we have yet to tell the truth. And so that's really what we're advocating for. And so when we talk about that, how it impacts and it looks different for each one of us. Some are okay telling our story and some are not. Some haven't, they still can't physically say the words. And science is catching up to trauma, right? And studies are being done and they're saying that childhood trauma impacts your personality as an adult. And so you might grow up super strong and independent, but really you're untrusting and you can't ask for help. And so trauma that impacts your behavior, and that's why we have community traits. As a tribe, we might all behave one way or another, and we might not realize that's actually trauma. It wasn't a choice. Now, it helped us survive and it helped us get to where we're at, but it might not be the best as an adult. And so when we talk about healing, and healing from things that were never a choice, that you never had a say in, it's so much deeper and broader than the definition, you'll find on Google. And so I really want to say thank you to each of you in the room who are going to go out this week and advocate and ask the legislatures, tell the truth, bring this forward. Let's tell the truth. And today's the time, and the time is now.
Thank you. My next question is back to Deborah. So it's been deeply inspiring and also harrowing to see the growing national awareness around the history of Indian boarding schools in the United States. Why is this the moment? Could you speak also to the origination of the Truth and Healing Commission movement and the creation of NABS?
Absolutely. Thank you. And I just want to add that, when we talk about intergenerational trauma, it's in our cells, it's in our being. And when I first really realized, oh my gosh, the part of speaking language, I was taking our Allyship language class and I literally could not breathe. And I thought, I want to learn our language, but what is going on with my body? I was shaking, and I've taken the class 3 different times, and I've had this impact on my body, just shaking and feeling like I couldn't breathe. I had to walk out of the room. And then the last time I walked out of the room, I just drove off and I didn't return to the class. And so I've had to really study and learn and understand the impacts of the Federal Indian Boarding School on my family and currently on myself. And so each and every day, just being able to come to Congress and talk about why this bill is important it takes a brave person, especially a Native American, Alaska Native, Native Hawaiian, who comes forward to tell their story, because we are right in the middle of this understanding. We're right in the middle of returning bones of our children back home and reburial. We're right in the middle of asking for our items back. So I just wanted to state that. And then the question again, I'm sorry, I had to just state that part.
No,
Yes.
Thank you for adding that. Asking about the origination of the Truth and Healing Commission movement, and especially the creation of NABS.
Absolutely. It goes back to the trauma suffered. It goes back to tribal leaders across the country and elders saying, how come in Canada they have their Truth and Reconciliation bill? How come they're talking about residential schools in Canada and other places, but the U.S. doesn't even know that we exist, much less that we were sent to boarding schools across the country. Some of the boarding schools were in our backyards. The Tulalip Industrial School is literally 4 or 5 minutes from my home right now. So we still have some of those buildings that are there. We have the small jail cell above our below the dining hall where some of the kids were sent, and it's right next to the water. So there's a lot of the remnants still there. It was one of the first steps for NABS was to identify how many boarding schools were in the United States, because we still didn't know. There were studies done across the country, and folks were discussing, well, how many boarding schools? But NABS really took it upon ourselves to research, to understand how many. And the current amount that we have is 523 total Indian boarding schools that operated in the United States between 1801 and present. 408, which you'll see in Secretary Deb Haaland's report, were Indian boarding schools identified by the Department of Interior that received, now here's the key, federal support. from 1819 to 1969. So 105 of the Indian boarding schools with no evidence of federal support. So 105 were privately, either by religious institutions for the most part. They operated without federal funding. So that could include building, food, rations, things like that. 10 Indian boarding schools opened the Bureau by the Bureau of Indian Education after 1969, or schools that need further research. 125 schools open today that were or are considered Indian boarding schools. So today 125 still are operating. 38 in the United States where Indian boarding schools operated. So 38 states. And I also wanted to add that a lot of times you go to those boarding schools and there's the cemetery nearby. And I've just learned this past year that our cemetery was right by the first boarding school, and that boarding school burnt down. And so there's an older cemetery there. They moved the boarding school further by our bay, and there's a cemetery right there. And then the Tulalip Industrial School, just we believe there's bodies that are surrounding that area. And you know, we had different practices, different burial practices, and we had each tribal nation, each band within those tribal nations had their own customs and belief systems. So Teresa and I are both from the Tulalip tribes, but her band may have come from the Cascade area region. Mine may have came from the Snohomish River and the banks of the Snohomish River, or Camino Island and the heads. So each one of us carry our own religion, our own belief systems, our own languages, and the way we live and communicate with one another for us in our longhouses. So this bill, NABS, is in our research, we're creating a national database. All of this is to help us tell the story. And so first and foremost, as Teresa mentioned and Larry, we need the truth. We need the truth that has not been in the history books. We need the truth about where the records are, where our children are buried. And so that's the very, very much beginnings. And unfortunately, we're in 2024 asking for the very beginning of the school system and what happened to our children.
And just a quick follow-up question in case anyone else is wondering this. Could you tell us when NABS was founded, and like how long have you all been doing this work?
About 11, 12 years we've been in operation. So we're a nonprofit, and just recently we've, I think, tripled in size. So we currently have approximately 24 staff members. So we've been operating, I know when Vance was there, maybe there were 3 people, and that was 4 or 5 years ago. So very small, very humble. And so we are right now trying to raise funds. Today is a big day for us. We have several staff members traveling to Oklahoma to start our oral history project. So we're interviewing boarding school survivors. And it's a pretty amazing work, because we're going to start with a ceremony with the relatives in Oklahoma, and then go into 3 days of interviewing, and also close with a feast and close in ceremony. So each location will have as much respect as we can give to the tribal nations within those regions. And so that's where the humble beginnings, but also we're growing, and we will continue to grow. We will continue to expand, because there's a lot of work to do.
Thank you. So this next question is diving a little deeper now into the commission itself and what the bill would do. So I have a 2-part question for Teresa and Larry. So first, Teresa, what is the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding Schools in the United States Act? And what would a Truth and Healing Commission do?
Absolutely. So how many of you were able to get our postcard? One. So I know at 2:00 too, we're going to have a breakout as well back in this room to go really over the legislation for more. But this postcard is really perfect. It explains what HR 7227 and Senate Bill 1723 is. And it really, these bullet points are the highlight. The federal commission, what it'll do is create a 6-year federal commission, and it'll conduct a full inquiry into the assimilated policies of the United States Indian boarding schools, including identifying the locations of children's burials, their sites, document ongoing impacts, and then locating church and government records. It'll go further than what the Department of Interior is doing. The Department of Interior is doing a fabulous job in researching and identifying, but they have a limited scope of authority. So this federal commission would go beyond that, right? Be able to go after state records, local records, and private records as well. It'll collect testimony from boarding school survivors, tribes, and subject matter experts, and to do this in a holistic way that is not causing more trauma and more pain. It's really important when we talk about boarding school survivors of protecting them, protecting their identity, and protecting their story. It's really easy to get into poverty porn when we want to go and people be like, oh, can you hook us up with a boarding school survivor to tell their story? And it's like, no, we're not going to do that. That's not what this is about. And it's not about creating headlines or newspapers to say, look, here's my most horrific moments of my life. Let's write a story about that for a newspaper. This is so much deeper than that, and it goes into that. And so understanding we are all accountable to respecting survivor stories and how we treat them and go forward, and how we do that with the utmost respect. And so it'll also create a finding and recommendations report. So after the 6 years, it's a 6-year federal commission. After the 6 years, it will come back. We expect it to be similar to how Canada created their 93 calls of action. We expect it to be the same way with regards to education, to healthcare, to mental health, to economics. How do you make Native people whole from the genocide that was committed? What does that look like? And we expect that to be outlined in the report that will come forward after 6 years. And it'll really collect all of the records. There are lots of books and research done on individual boarding schools and individual families who've done their own research to tell their own story, but it's not housed anywhere. And so where's the records? Who has the records? And then how do you keep them and store them and make them available for family members who don't know what happened to their family? And so all of that is the condensed version of what this bill will do. The bill is 60 plus pages. It goes into great detail of breaking out how the committees will be structured, who will be on the committees, what their authority will be. And so it is all laid out in the bill as well. And so that's the short version of what this federal commission will do.
And then the other part of that question, Larry, obviously, please feel free to add. Also, why we talked a bit about this yesterday. Why is this a nonpartisan issue above party and politics? We've been saying that this whole weekend, but hearing more about it from you would be helpful.
Sure. Thank you. And I'm going to digress too a bit. So when we talk about how, and this I think ties into the bipartisan piece, but you know, the work that these ladies do and all that work with them is just phenomenal. And we all come at it from a place of, you know, a personal history as a result of boarding schools in and of themselves, federal policy, assimilation, termination of our people. And about 5 years ago, you know, as tribal chairman, I felt it was my duty in representing my people to learn my language. Mm-hmm. And that was very difficult because between the Ponca tribe of Nebraska and the Ponca tribe of Oklahoma, and the reason why we're separate is a whole nother story. But it's about termination and it's about assimilation. But between our two tribal nations, we have 11,000 tribal citizens. 10 today speak our language fluently as a result of those federal policies. And this really hit home for me and on this subject, because we had an elder about 6 years ago before he passed. He was very sick, and he asked me to come see him, and I went to his home, and he asked me to pray for him at his funeral in our language, because I was one of the only ones that could to speak that there. And he wanted to have that done because he remembered back when he was a boy, and our people in our ceremonies, that we still had elders that could speak the language, but he was a product of the boarding school, and that was beaten out of him, and he wanted to have that. So that's part of the work. I haven't told that story before.
Yeah.
That's part of the work, what we do, and it still affects us today. And so when we talk about a bipartisan aspect, it isn't to, I take it from it's not to assign blame today, but these were federal policies passed by the United States government against our people. And what we're asking for is that reconciliation today. The groups I talked to yesterday, in Indian country, we can't afford to be Republican. We can't afford to be Democrat. We're Indian. And so in our organization, we are a bipartisan organization, and we are very dependent on both parties to do their job. And when we look at an issue like this, it's to look at what happened in the past and rectify that. It was federal policy to remove our children from our tribal nations and send them off and eliminate our language, eliminate our culture, our traditions, eliminate who we were as people. In this country, Indian people weren't even considered human beings in the eyes of the law until 1879. The first people of this country weren't considered even Americans until 1925. And this year, we're celebrating the 100 years of just being able to vote.
Yeah.
And so when we look at all of those issues, those were all federal policies that were designed, as it was shared. These boarding schools were supported by federal dollars. It's their job to right that wrong. And so when we look to Congress, we need the support of both parties, and especially as partisan as the last few Congresses have been and seem to get more. We need to have the support of both to move forward, to rectify this, and make sure that as any one of you, and your families and what happens when people pass and where we put them and how special that is. The power of place for tribal nations is in our DNA. So when we bury our people in our homelands, we talk about everything, in our language, we say, Ede Wongide, means we're all related. And we're part of that land that we come from, because when we bury our people, the grass that grows, the medicines that grow have the DNA of our people in there. And in my tribe, we can't be with our ancestors on the other side unless we're buried with our ancestors. So when we can't find those that were taken away and were buried and forgotten, that means they're not with our people. And so these are the things that all these stories are different, but they're the same. And when we talk about the bipartisan effort, again, it's not about assigning blame. It's about fixing it and helping us bring our people home and identifying that. So that's how we approach that from a legislative standpoint, and making sure that this wrong is corrected the best we possibly can. And our people, our ancestors, deserve the right to know. And when I've had the opportunity of working with one boarding school in my state, and when you sit down and you see an actual record of when one of my people from my tribe were admitted into that boarding school, and you see that document, just that document is so powerful, because you know the suffering that little kid went through. And the first one I saw happened to be from my family. And so those are the kinds of things that we need to know, we need to be able to find, and so that we can identify everyone that never came home. So.
Can I add to what Larry is speaking to is the ceremonies of our ways. By 1820, boarding schools were highly organized on how to completely destroy our teachings and beliefs. And so when he says they intentionally and purposely would do opposite of how we would bury our people and how we would take care of them, it was highly intentional the way they did it to destroy our belief system and our teachings. It was so organized by 1820 of the best ways to do this, to break the spirit. And so the stories he's sharing is so intentional of doing that, right? It wasn't just perhaps it was a result. They purposely seeked those things out. And it's so important to acknowledge that Native Americans were not a minority group. We're actually a political class of people with inherent rights, those rights we were born with and have always had, and reserved rights, those rights that are outlined in our treaties, in the United States Constitution, and case laws. So it's really important when we talk about Native Americans that we acknowledge that we're a political class of people, and we are citizens to our nations first, and then we are citizens to the United States, right? And so that political difference makes us not Democrat or Republican, because the issues that we go forward with are Native issues. And they are directly linked to our sovereign nations and to why the treaty and trust responsibility the United States is responsible for. The only ones who can sign a treaty are sovereign nations. And so our treaties we have with the United States are those that require the United States to fulfill their trust responsibility. So nothing's free. Nothing's free for Native Americans. We are not freely given education, healthcare, or these things. It's a treaty right and a responsibility, and we paid with our lives for that. And so we are just asking the United States to uphold that trust responsibility and maintain the agreement, because a treaty never expires.
And much of the land is unceded. So there were lands that were not given to the United States. And what we're really talking about here is genocide, is absolute genocide. And Teresa mentioned Google genocide, and you'll see the exact actions of the United States and others who came to the United States to commit these acts of genocide against Native Americans, the first indigenous peoples of this land.
Thanks to all three of you for adding more context. This question asks for Teresa specifically. In your advocacy around the Truth and Healing Commission, what have been 2 or 3 of the biggest obstacles that you've encountered in carrying out the vision and goal of establishing that commission? And are there common pushbacks that advocates can expect when they meet with their legislators tomorrow? We have discussed this some already. It would be great to hear more from you.
Yeah, I'll start it and then ask Sitsa to add in as well. When we're talking about the Truth and Healing Commission, the biggest thing people don't understand is just what it is. And so when we say boarding schools, most people think privilege, polo shirts, horses, it's eliteness. Boarding schools are elite, boarding schools are the top. And so most just don't know the history of boarding schools. They have no idea the time frame. They have no idea that there's 523 in 38 states. They have no idea there's day schools, orphanages, asylums that also stole Native children, and that they don't realize too, even though boarding schools closed, the stealing of Native children still continued. That's why in 1978, we passed the Indian Child Protection, the ICW, to protect Native children, because they're still being taken today. It's just all been legal too. None of this was illegal. This was all legal by federal law. And local sheriffs helped ensure and put Native parents in jail if they tried to get their children from boarding schools. And so all of this is legal. Many don't know. So some of it you might just encounter of like, what are you talking about? I've never heard this before. How do I not know? It's like, exactly, that's the problem. And so really it's just about educating. And so most people sometimes when you talk, it's being like, hey, did you know this happened? Have you heard about it? This is an ability. The second part is, oh, if we do this, then they're going to be asking for everything, right? They're going to come in and it's going to lead to, we're going to have to pay for this. And it's like, well, let's start with the truth. And let's start with the fact that we still aren't telling the truth of the United States. And we're not even going to get into critical race theory, right? We can't even talk about that. Oh, goodness. But literally the history and stories of the creation of the United States on Native Americans, other than the 2 paragraphs you're taught in school is it, right? This would actually address that. And so it's that other part of it of why. Why does this matter? Because it's the truth, and there are people today who are still suffering. And the other thing is addressing if Indian boarding schools, if the intent was education, Native Americans would have the highest rate of graduation from high school and would have the highest rate of college degrees. Shocker, we don't. We actually have the highest rate of high school dropout, and our college rates are increasing, but not steadily at a rate that should be associated with 100 years of education given to us by the government. So we know for a fact education for Native children started as genocide. Education in Department of Interior said the intent from the federal government for establishing these schools was to get land. The United States used Indian boarding school to get tribal land. That was their number 1 reason for starting these schools. Number 2 was death and destruction of Native people and families. If you died there and went missing, hey, cool on that, right? It was not a big deal. It was actually cheaper that way because the United States were losing to war for tribes, and it was too costly to continue to go to war with us. And so it was just shifting their way of how they dealt with us. And so in all of this, it's about resources. And so you will encounter people who are like, oh, we don't have the money, we don't have the funds. And it's like, no, you have a responsibility, because the federal government ran these schools, funded them, and orchestrated them. You are directly responsible for correcting it, addressing it, and telling the truth. And so in this bill does not call for any action. It's just investigate it and tell the history is what this bill is about. It's a truth-seeking bill. And so, was there anything else?
I think you covered it really well, but it's important to note the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was passed in 1978. So that was a bill that prior to the act, many aspects of Native American religions and sacred ceremonies had been prohibited by law, which means in my lifetime. So if you hear folks in Congress say, well, that was a long time ago, past anything that we can understand, hundreds of years ago, these acts, these policies were created to eradicate our people, to take our lands, to dispossess us of all things that were important to us. If you see pictures of children that you'll say, oh, that's a lot of little boys. Well, they were girls, and their hair was cut off because they found out our hair is really sacred to us. Our hair has our energy, it has our medicine. And so they would cut off the children's hair. And so our hair is our antennas. It's how we understand how the wind moves. It's how we understand our connection to the land. It's a part of our body. So what they did is they cut it off. And so in a lot of the historical photos, you'll see what appears to be little boys, but it's a group of little girls. And this was across the country, and the 523 plus, because we're still identifying schools. Ongoing research continues to tell us there were other schools that did this to our children. And so we have the right to know what happened and where our children are buried. We have the right to find out where these records are to tell the story. And that's what we're asking for. So when you enter into the office, you can remember that even today, when I was a child, it was illegal for us to carry our drums. We're a potlatch people, so we had blankets, and Teresa and Allyship can attest to this way of life, that we often have blankets and drums in our cars because we sing our songs. That's the medicine to us. That's our connection to Creator. That's our connection to the Kokolh, the whales. That's our connection to the animals that reside, the eagles. Spakwa, that's our connection. And so for us having that connection, we were gelled. And my dad used to drive down the road and take us to one of the houses so he can go practice our ceremonies. So there was a time before, when I was younger, that if I was caught with my dad, I could have been taken away by Indian child, by the government. There was still that was still in place in my time. So it's still happening today, as Teresa mentioned. And so this is why the time is now to understand this truth. The time is now that the United States face this reality and start to talk about what were these beginnings of the United States, what happened. And I think all of you in this room and beyond this room deserve to know the truth. And that's what we're seeking right now. So if you go to those offices and they say, well, what do they want? What do they want? Right now, we want the truth. We demand the truth. And we thank you for, there's not a lot of our people. Many were killed off. So in our tribe, we have, what's our current numbers?
Over 5,000.
About 5,000?
Yeah.
About 5,000 of us. And that's 5 bands. That's 5 bands of Snoqualmie, Snohomish, and other allied bands in our area, Stillaguamish. And so there's not a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to fly across the country to come to Washington, D.C. to tell this story. So thank you for listening. Thank you for being a part of this narrative. And we just know that we need more voices on the Hill. And so we're grateful for the Quakers and the Friends for being here to help us.
That does bring me to my next question. So it is for you. So religious groups, including the Religious Society of Friends, Quakers, operated several Indian boarding schools. And many Friends are reckoning with Quakers' role in this era and are deeply engaged in their own internal investigation and contrition work. So what have you found to be the responsibility of faith communities as they do this work?
Wow, I jumped ahead.
Go ahead.
I'm charged up. So I feel like doing this work each and every day to help tell the story about boarding school survivors, there's this emotional wave that we go through that's just on the airplane having tears because I'm remembering my grandmother and the stories of marching in military lines. And she said her sweater was really itchy. And my grandma Harriet telling me when I was little, this is how I hid. This is why I can speak my language, is because I hid under the kitchen table. And she was a tiny woman, so I was like 3rd grade and almost her size. And so we got under the table and we hid. And that's how she was able to maintain some of our songs and languages and to carry those forward, is because she hid from the officers who would come and take the children, and they'd say, "We know they're in here." And she said there was a long tablecloth, so she was under the table while the officers would come in, and they'd say government officials that were there to take them. And so when I hid under the table with her, I just thought, wow, how scary that would be, not knowing that someday I would come and work for a national nonprofit to help tell those stories. So that's why this is critically important. And I wish there were many more of us to tell the stories, but unfortunately, because of trauma, we still face high rates of suicide, alcoholism, drug addiction. We have some of the top disparities in our healthcare. And of course, like our systems and our bodies, we're not made to have milk, which I had ice cream on the plane, so that wasn't great. But our bodies weren't set up for the sugar and many of these systems that came later. And unfortunately, we suffer from many of those ailments. And for Tulalip, and I know for other tribes, the rate of our longevity of our systems and our bodies is often in the early 50s.
Yeah.
So for me to be at the age I am right now, 53, I'm living longer than many of my relatives. And again, that's due to intergenerational trauma, alcoholism. I've had many of my best friends who have committed suicide. A lot of illness. And so often we travel and we take this journey with as much strength, as much prayer, as much hope that we can carry with us, because there's not enough of us to tell the story. So when you have the opportunity and you hear someone in Congress tell you that this is not important to America, well, it is important to America. And we hope that you'll know that we're important too. Maybe back in the day, with the goal of those who came to this country were to take our lands and to dispossess us of our own self-awareness and our own ability to speak our language, to do our own trade. That today, if you believe love thy neighbor, and if you seek to have this world of love and compassion, that you'll also extend that to those who are leaders in this country. And yes, you'll have to educate them about the boarding school, because I've been doing this with this boarding school bill for over 4 years maybe now. The time is continuing, but right now, it is still time to educate. It is still time to tell the truth. And that's all we're seeking right now, is that truth.
So this final question is for Larry, but if you both also want to give your thoughts, that would be great. So we often find that in movements, people who are not directly impacted or who do not have lived experience want to be sensitive to avoid co-opting a movement. And we have hundreds of young people with us today from across the country with many different backgrounds. So for those of us who are allies, how have you seen effective and meaningful allyship in the truth, justice, and healing movement?
Yeah, I think it even goes beyond that when we talk about allies for any country. We need advocates. And when we talk about the political process, and as you go to talk to members of Congress on this specific issue, it's bigger than that as well. And as I shared yesterday with the groups, there are people sitting in this room that are going to be a politician someday. It might be on the local level, might be on the state level. You might be in the halls of Congress. You could be in the administration. You might be a governor. And the first time that you hear about Native issues shouldn't be when you get to office. And so, and you as young leaders yourselves, it's the advocacy part, but it's also the power of your voice and the power of your vote. And good people elect bad politicians by not voting. And so when we look to, as you advocate, it's being part of organizations like this, listening to where they're coming from, getting that information, and being an extension of that voice. And to me, that's not co-opting. And there's good ways and bad ways to do it, I suppose. But if you consider yourself an expert over the other voices, that's more co-opting, in my opinion. But when you're bringing the voice of groups like NABS or even NCAI, and you're saying, this is what these organizations are saying, I'm sharing it with you, Mr. and Miss Politician, because you represent me in my area. That's a strong voice for Indian country as a whole. We're 1% of the overall population. In many places, we can make a difference in our local elections. But as I shared yesterday as well, there's 435 members of Congress that are up for election this year. And of those, there's 84 tribal nations that are represented by those folks. In the Senate, there's 35 seats that are up for election this year. And of those, 24 of them have tribal nations in their districts. They all represent states that have boarding schools historically within their boundaries. That's still their responsibility. And so your voice, your advocacy, talking to your representatives is a powerful thing that has an extension for the work that we all do. And to talk on that level, that's where the allyship comes in. That's where the partnership comes in. And there's not one of our organizations that's not thankful for it or depends on it. I mean, we depend on them. We need your voices if you're a true advocate to helping right wrongs or advocate on behalf of the tribal nations that are in this country today. And there are 574 federally recognized tribes. And there are many other state tribes. But every one of them lost land that this country has benefited from economically. So you talk about, sorry, I'm going to go back. You talk about funding and priorities and why this is important and why should this commission be done and this report be done. Funding is where our priorities are. And in this country, we fund all kinds of stupid stuff. Anybody from Kansas? Sorry to pick on your state. Is it hilly or is it flat in Kansas?
My people are from the Flint Hills, so it's hilly there, the rest is flat.
Yeah. So there was a report that was funded by the federal government to do a evaluation of, is Kansas mostly flat or is it hilly? Guess what they came back with? It's flat. And in my state, they did a funding and a report on the mating habits of the tiger beetle that is in this area. So we can fund things like that.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about. And if we can put funding to all these different kinds of things and to have this and what this would mean for our people, it's a no-brainer. But that's what we're up against. And so, we talk about BIA, we talk about the Department of Interior, and now I'm going on a rant, sorry. But BIA is in the Department of Interior. What's the Department of Interior look at? Rocks, trees, water, Indians.
Yep.
That's how we're relegated in this country. Now, never mind that it started out as the War Department against Indians, but that's where we're at today. And we're not, they tried to get rid of us. We're not going anywhere. And we're, I've heard this. The previous president of our organization said it, and I think this is powerful for us as tribal people. We're the descendants of our ancestors, and we're the ancestors of our descendants. And it's our duty to carry that on and right the wrong. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Okay, girls got me crying up here.
Yeah.
Okay.
See what happens?
We love you, Larry.
Thank you so much for sharing. At this point, I do want to see what questions there are in the audience. Reminder that there are more opportunities to speak with all of these people that are on the stage at, is it 2 o'clock? Yes, from 2 to 3 p.m. there will be another sit down that dives even deeper into the policy. So let's take some questions now, and hopefully even more questions will be answered from 2 to 3 p.m. So I see a hand right here.
Thank you for everything you've shared. This question is specifically on like speaking and pitching this policy to senators, to Congress people rather. There is the expectation of like this is a duty of the federal government, and obviously that's something that I agree with intuitively on like a moral, emotional level, but that's not always how this is going to be framed in the people you're having conversations with. There is some situations in which what you'll be met with is just like essentially naked chauvinism of like, yes, this may be true, but this makes America look bad. I work for the American government. I don't want to look bad. I don't really want to talk about it, even if it is true. Is there anything that can be said to in those conversations? Is there anything necessarily like worth saying? Is there any way to like further that conversation, or are those people a write-off as far as trying to get this legislation through?
I would say when it comes to the United States history with tribal nations, they already look bad. This makes it look worse. And so right the wrong. Because it's not assigning blame to current members of Congress, but that blame will be assigned if they do nothing when they had the opportunity to do something. And you know, people can have their own opinion, but they can't have their own facts. You know, the facts are the facts, and that's all that we're asking for, so that you know, that healing part of it. Tell the truth so our people can heal and move forward. And when we talk about even the documentation, and I know we hadn't really addressed this yet, but even allowing for subpoena opportunity to get those records that people don't want to share. And, you know, that's tough. And, but at the same time, that's what's needed to get to the root of this issue. And you know, that's the opportunity that they have to, again, move forward and right the wrong.
And I would add truth, justice, and the pursuit of happiness. Native Americans deserve that too. So that's a basic human right. That's you know, a basis of those who came to the United States, and that's the tagline. And so the question would be, don't Native Americans deserve that as well? The first peoples of these lands. So it's absolutely, the truth is necessary. Is it going to be painful? Well, not as much as those who have lived that experience and continue to live that experience. But we can do this together as a nation. We must heal, and it starts with telling the truth. It starts with those leaders in Congress and community members, people, faith-based folks who will join us to say that we can right some wrongs in the United States on these lands right here, on the lands of the Stohovish people, the lands of the Caddo, the lands of the Hopi, the lands of the Navajo, of all the tribes that our dear relative here, he represents at the National Congress of American Indians. So yeah, with your voice, you know, keep researching and understanding. The boardingschoolhealing.org is our website. So if you need to refer to that when you're in offices, please do. Please give us a call too, and we're happy to help as much as we can.
It'd also be really helpful strategically explaining which offices are pushback and which ones you're having a hard time with. You let us know, and we can tag team, because there's strategy in this, right? Some offices have to have resolutions of support and letters from their governor or whoever they listen to. So sometimes it's finding out who they associate with and who they will listen to, and then going and getting a resolution, and or be it from their party in the state or from someone within the state to them to help them make the right choice, right? It gives them backing. And so sometimes you just have to discover who that particular office will listen to, get a resolution, letter of support, and then put it through. And then that covers them from saying, see, I have to do it. My constituents are saying. And then it's also so important for locally using people at home to call their offices, right? So your zip code matters of who you contact, and using those kinds of things. And so social media is amazing for outreach, using TikToks to be like, hey, call up Senator so-and-so, call up your congressman, this specific congressperson, here's their phone number. Using social media for those purposes for strategy, because they listen to people within their constituency, right? Like I can call New York, but I'm from Washington State, so they're like, okay, thanks, no thanks. But if you're from that, so that is effective as well. Pressure.
And I'll quickly say, one of you mentioned the website. So we actually have the NABS toolkit information on the back of your program. So the very last page, you'll find the link to the toolkit, and you can find more information there. And I'll also take this time to say that it will be, oh, thank you for putting it up on the screen. It will be even more important that after you all lobby, that you fill out report back forms, which you'll get more information about, so that this great work can continue, so that we know what offices are saying, so that they know what offices are saying, and we can continue to work in partnership. We'll take one more question, and then we do have to move on. Reminder that they will be here from 2 to 3 as well, so more questions can be answered then. But I did see a hand right here. Oh, someone's coming to you with a mic.
No, I think I'm Daisy good cheerleader, so I think I can project really loud.
Well, she's right behind you.
Thank you. So my question is for the two ladies. I know as a Black female, the way I express express myself is through my hair. So one, she told a story about her skirt, but can you tell a story about your skirt? And then can you also tell us how you determine what story you're going to tell when you put it on your skirt? Yeah, I was just really fascinated. I was like, this is cool.
I feel left out.
Right?
You need to
Tell us
start
about
there.
your
Yes,
ribbon
Kurt.
bolo.
Maybe you can tell about your bolo. Well, so the skirt that I have on is made by Lacey Kinnart. She is right now in Oklahoma, working with the boarding school survivors and the Oral History Project. She made this skirt, and I think it was one of her first skirts, but it has the hummingbird. And so the hummingbird is a messenger. I think it feels like of happiness and of joy. So as we work with boarding school survivors, we know as traumatic as these stories may be, that we hope to bring back joy and peace and love within the spirits and the minds of our people, and also restore peace and love back into our traditional lands. And so we are heavily connected to the land. So a lot of what we believe in is that connection to all things, to the birds, to the winged, to the four-legged, to the rooted. And so we strongly believe that all things are alive and all things are from creation. And so we connect to that. And I was studying last night about the Quakers, so I was learning myself about how all things are connected and created under the Creator's love for us. And so that's a strong belief system for us as we enter into some of our ceremonies that were said. They called us pagans or heathens, or, for the ceremony that I belong to, the way of life I belong to is our longhouse. And so for those ceremonies are sacred to our people, and they were of connecting to the land. And so we were discriminated against. We were treated harshly and punished for that belief system. So it's taken us some time, but our younger people are now being raised in ceremony and going back to our skirts and how our skirts touch the earth. And so you'll see ribbon skirts from across the country. Alicia has one on too. We want to stand up, Alicia. Alicia's with us, and she's also one of our ceremony ceremonial people at home. So she helps with keeping our fires burning. And those fires tell us of our stories of our relatives, our ancestors, and our connection to the earth, which is all extremely beautiful. And so we acknowledge the creator God, our ancestors that follow us and protect us. And so what we wear is all usually a piece of, sometimes we have shells, you'll see shells, and these are all a piece of the land that helps protect us and guide us each and every day. And so I know, Teresa, I think she described her skirt, but maybe.
Well, and Alicia's skirt, she has 7 ribbons on it too, which is significant. And so every skirt is different and everyone makes them as different, right? And so her skirt, the 5 dark purple is my mother and our 4 sisters. And the 2 top is Alicia and Heidi. And so that 7 generations is our direct family. And we made this for our mother to acknowledge her. And so me and Alicia were actually first cousins. And so she's represented as in that skirt. The 7 generations is our responsibility. So we know 7 generations ago, our ancestors prayed for us, and today is our responsibility for the next 7 generations. And so she's one of those ribbons in that. My skirt has 7 ribbons on it, 13. The 13 ribbons are the 13 moons, and for a full cycle. And so understanding 4 generations and a full cycle of 13 moons. And so everyone makes them different and puts in their own thoughts and prayers into it. And some can just be for fun and because they look fantastic. And so ribbon skirts is really a presentation of whatever we want it to be. And I think that's the beautiful gift we have, is showing up in your true self. So men get power socks, like Larry has his power socks on, right? And our Native men really show up with their bolos and our jewelry. Our jewelry is significant to who we are because it comes from nature, and it tells the locations we come from. You can tell the regions by our jewelry, and then who we belong to and what we belong to. So there's always so much more that goes into it. And sometimes we're free to share, and other times it's not your business. So it's private knowledge versus public knowledge, and so some people might not be willing to tell you, and it's not personal. It's just not for you to know. And so that's okay too, because it is, you wear it as protection and identity, and you're able to tell who is from where by what we represent too.
Oh, I forgot. I have the cedar. This is a cedar belt that I have on, and it's woven from the cedar bark. So we harvest in the springtime our cedar bark, and we put it away until the following year or 2 years, and then we weave. And so cedar is a protection of our people. So that's how we survived in our longhouses, and it's also, our strong protection. So when I have my cedar belt or cedar earrings, or sometimes we wear things that you can't see that are personal to us. But for us, the cedar weaving, we have baskets. That's how we survive many winters, and we continue to give respect to the cedar tree. And it also represents how rooted we are to the earth and the connection that we have to the spirit of the cedar.
So with that, I'd love to give our panelists a round of applause. I want to remind you all one more time that the NABS toolkit is at the back of the program. You'll also find other resources for lobbying, including the lobby visit report form at the QR code that's on page 5. So this is all in the program. Make sure that you're checking out all of those resources, the frequently asked questions, the resources NABS has provided on their website, and continue to prep for these visits. And speaking of prep for these visits, that is what we're going to transition into. And to do that, I'm going to ask my colleague Justin, who's back there, to come up here and give some instructions on, we're going to be leaving this room and going to our separate other rooms to start actually training for the lobbying. Yes, exciting. I know it says there will be a small break. I think during the